We'll start off the show in Cameroon, where President Paul Biya has secured an eighth term in office. The Constitutional Council announced that Biya, aged 92, won 53.66% of the vote. That's against 35.19% for his former ally, Issa Chiroma. Now, protests erupted across several cities, with opposition supporters taking to the streets, particularly in Douala, where clashes with police have continued to intensify. The demonstrators are now calling for an independent investigation into alleged election irregularities. There was no immediate comment on the result from the government, which of course has rejected opposition's accusations of these irregularities.
I hereby declare elected President of the Republic, having obtained the majority of the votes cast, the candidate Biya Paul.
The Cameroonian people, the youth of Cameroon, are demanding the victory by majority vote. We all know that Cameroon, the people, voted overwhelmingly for Issa Chiroma Bakari. He admitted that it was unacceptable that President Paul Biya won in certain war zones.
Cameroon has a very good image abroad. I don't understand why someone would take power and treat it as if it belonged to their family. Cameroon is not a kingdom. Cameroon is a country, a blessed country, a very beautiful country, a country respected by all and by everyone. So, we must preserve Cameroon's image, whatever the cost.
Now, of course, Cameroon's economy is facing mounting debt, maturing Eurobonds, and also a pretty heavy reliance on commodities. Now, investors are weighing whether Biya's extended rule will steady or shake confidence, in one of Central Africa's largest economies. In light of all this, CGTN's Ian Kinua has this report.
Cameroon's long-serving president, Paul Biya, has been declared the winner once again, tightening his grip on power after more than 4 decades in office. But for investors, the focus is less on politics and more on the country's finances. Cameroon's $690 million IMF program ended in July, and markets are watching to see if Biya's government will pursue a new deal. With the economy dependent on exports such as cocoa, crude oil and timber, experts say the sector risks further exposure to global price swings and climate shocks. The IMF says the nation's debt remains sustainable, but warns of high risk of distress. The government is also seeking to raise around $1.6 billion locally and abroad to bridge the funding gap, while its first Eurobond worth $750 million matures next month. At 92, Biya's advanced age and unclear succession plan adds to investor uncertainty. Ian Kinua, CGTN.
Now, earlier, I spoke to Henry Kwam, the Executive Director at the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, and we kicked off our conversation with a look at the top issues for investors during Cameroon's recent election.
So investors in Cameroon and outside of Cameroon, like everywhere else, are worried about one thing: political stability, because that has an impact on the economy, the government's ability to repay its debts, and also on their assets in the country. Now, prior to the elections, there was a feeling that change was going to come this time around. To some, it is disappointing that it didn't, and the incumbents won. But I think most investors are now looking to see whether the political situation continues or whether there's a deterioration. That will determine how they react going forward.
But what really is your take on the economic plan previously? And we had the finance minister saying this week that industrialization, infrastructure modernization, and also economic diversification, those will be their top goals for this coming year. Are investors confident in that economic plan? Do you feel like it's the status quo?
Well, it's more of the status quo. I think it's important to point out that the incumbents didn't present any manifesto during the elections, before and during the elections. But most importantly, they have tabled plans like an import substitution plan that was launched back in 2021, which hasn't really yielded any tangible benefits. So Cameroon, up till today, doesn't produce up to 10% of fish, meat, or cereals or rice. So I think there's quite a lot of work for the incumbents to do. Now, it's not all been bad. I think after 42 years under President Biya, we've seen an increase in the number of people attending and leaving school. So I think on the whole, there's been a slight positive impact on educational outcomes. Now, this is also because they've benefited from a range of support from partners across the world, from Canada, the United States, the World Bank, etc. Now, when it comes to economic transformation, manufacturing as a percentage of GDP in Cameroon is less than 14%. So when we talk about progress in economic transformation, I think we should be cautious about overstating that progress, because the primary sector, it's true that the service sector contributes well over 50% of GDP, but that's made up of informal sector workers in communications, in the food markets, artisanal mining, etc. So I think the stock take from the last 42 years is that policy implementation has been very slow, and there's been a reticence for the government to really open up its engagement with civil society. But that's changing, and the government is much more aware that they have to engage with civil society and engage with a range of stakeholders to ensure that policies are implemented properly. And if I can just take us back to a couple of years ago, Cameroon actually removed fuel subsidies, so the cost of living has gone up. According to a most recent World Bank report, 4 in 10 people live below the poverty line, which is 725 or 8 francs a day. And it goes to show that our economy is still very vulnerable to external shocks. It's highly dollarized. The majority of our trade is conducted in dollars. And the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is laudable, but it's been slow.
Right.
If we want to really accelerate economic industrialization, we have to ensure that businesses are equipped, they have the right capacity, and trading with the rest of the
Mr.
continent.
Kwam, I do want to go back to something you mentioned, which is the fact that the government removed 4 subsidies, which leads me to the question around the government being able to finance its budget going forward. Currently, public debt projected at about 42% of GDP. The IMF also classifies Cameroon's debt at high risk of distress, though it does say it is sustainable. We are also seeing that debut $750 million bond. It matures next month. So one has to question what is going to happen in terms of the country's ability to finance its debt and its budget going forward.
So Cameroon has been able to finance its debt so far, not due to a mix of factors, right? Part of it is a developing country's luck. Another part is due to an improvement in the fiscal management framework and the debt management framework, the consolidation of all of our debt under the Caisse Autonome d'Amortissement has improved the government's ability to plan to repay those debts. And Cameroon has never defaulted on its debt, so there's no reason why investors should be jittery. I think Cameroon, when it comes to political and economic stability, Cameroon does have the capacity to repay its debt. Yes, like most African countries, Cameroon spends more on debt repayment and on investing in healthcare and education. And that's unfortunate because we've contracted huge debts to finance infrastructure. But that goes to show that the government isn't giving enough support to the private sector to develop effectively. The same IMF, which says Cameroon is at high risk of debt distress, also pointed out that the private sectors in developing countries are not creating enough jobs because taxes have been reduced, yes, so they're no longer burdensome, but the administrative procedures and the amount of red tape that manufacturing companies have to contend with, or even service companies have to contend with, is mind-blowing. And so it's important for the government to reprioritize private sector-led development simply because state-driven capitalism a la chinoise hasn't worked for Cameroon.